Sounds good.
Excellent. So this is Jason Burnett. Jason Burnett, would you be up for just introducing yourself to everyone and letting us know a bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jason. I'm a Canadian trampoline athlete, and I've been part of the Canadian team for, it's been about 20 years. I've just recently retired this year. So it's be sort of first year without competing, although last year doesn't really count either because no one really competed during COVID, unfortunately. But over my career, I competed at 3 Olympic Games, winning a silver medal in 2008 in the Beijing Olympics, and then competing in London 2012 and Rio 2016 as well, having a little less luck reaching the podium and a few more injuries along the way that sort of stalled some progress along there. But lots of good stories and experiences came from that. I've also set a couple world records for the highest degree of difficulty performed in competition and in training. And just absolutely thoroughly love the sport. Despite being retired, I'd still love to stay involved. I'm doing a little bit of coaching now, a little bit of judging now. And yeah, just trying to figure out exactly what comes next after sport while still maintaining a connection with the trampoline community.
Excellent. So I'm going to start off by again reminding everyone, if you do have a question, just type it in the chat there. But I am going to start off, because we had a couple of people email questions ahead of time, by reading those out. So they're a little bit all over the place because obviously people have a lot of different interests, but we'll try and keep up. So I've got a couple of questions from Jonathan Butler, who was one of the first ones to get in there. What is your opinion on the potential removal of compulsory routines in the next code of points? So the removal of the set routine.
Yes, so I think that is a fairly exciting change. I think it'll relieve a little bit of pressure on people performing their routines, because my understanding is you remove the set and now you have 2 chances to do a single voluntary routine, which is exciting. So it might, just help out some of those athletes who experience a little bit of nerves or inconsistency in competition, sort of climb up the ranks a little bit more often. My concern with that rule is that people are going to be practicing the basics significantly less, I would imagine, right? Compulsories aren't the most fun routine to practice. And if you're doing doubles and triple somersaults, nobody really wants to spend, half the practice focusing on back tucks and back pikes either. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how everyone is able to maintain their basic fundamentals of trampoline without having to practice a compulsory routine or a first routine every single day and perform that in competition. So I think it'll be interesting.
Okay, thank you. I have a super specific question also from Jonathan. In your 3/4 back at the start of your routine, you used to start with your arms up and then bring them down your sides like somersault. And around 2014, you began to bring your arms down in front of you instead. And in 2017, you started with your arms down and brought them up and back down the front, both in midair. Would you discuss the thought process behind those choices?
Yeah, for sure. So I was the original 3/4 back, where I started with my arms up. That was just how I was taught 3/4 back. And I didn't really consider taking off my arms down until I'd seen people do it for a number of years. But starting with your arms up, I think is probably a better way to take off, just because that's how you're going to start all of your other single skills. So you're reinforcing that good technique on the very first trick of your compulsory, or at least that's where I placed it. That's where a lot of people place the 3/4 back. And really my reason for switching to the arms down takeoff is because sort of throughout the course of my injuries and sort of coming and going in and out of the sport, having to take time off for recovery, I just found that my shoulder strength and flexibility didn't always come back as strong as I would have liked. So when I would sort of reach arms overhead to take off for a 3/4 back, sometimes an arm would buckle a little bit, or there'd be a little bit of asymmetry. And that would kind of throw off the takeoff of the 3/4 back a little bit. So starting with my arms down and raising them up on takeoff kind of solved that issue for me. Although looking back, I know I stuck with that solution, but I still don't think it's the best solution to stick with. What I really should have done is focused on more conditioning and stretching in my upper body, and sort of got back to that sort of more ideal, more traditional takeoff of 3/4 back. I think the strength in the upper body would have helped that, but it also would have helped connectivity through the entire body as well, which probably would have improved all my trampoline tricks. But because I was recovering from a variety of different things, we'll say, mostly in the lower body, knees and ankles. Upper body got a little bit neglected, and we were running short on time to get back to meet. So we just sort of pieced together what we could in the short amount of time.
That's a very thorough answer. Thank you. So I have a couple of other questions from other people. One of which is, obviously you said yourself to a couple of different Olympic Games now, so you've had the experience 2 or 3 times. What was your best off trampoline moment at an Olympic Games? So not your routine, not your placings, but something that really sticks with you as a good memory.
Yeah, it would have been Rosie winning her gold medal at the 2012 Olympics for the first time, because I think like she was obviously a medal contender, and you know, she had won World Cups leading up to those games, but you know, and I think in her mind she definitely knew she had that potential, but she still seemed like a bit of an underdog for the gold medal ranking. So it was a little bit surprising when she took that medal, and it was very surprising when sort of Helena sat down at the end of her out bounce as well, which sort of allowed Rosie to take that top spot. But I was kind of, I don't know, being a little bit like self-involved, because the day before I had crashed in my own final and was thinking like I wanted to medal again. I wanted to get on the podium, this and that, blah, blah, blah. But I remember when Rosie won, all of that completely washed away. And I was just so thrilled and so excited to see her down there on the floor, see her on the podium. Like I was so pumped to see her in person for the first time. Like I knew I'd get to after the, you know, the drug tests and the media interviews. It might not be to the middle of the night, but like we were going to stay up, of course, to see her and to get that reaction, because that was just such an amazing moment for her.
That is so wholesome. That is really lovely. Okay, I'm gonna pick another one from the emails, and just remind people, do send in questions to the chat. Don't be scared to be the first person, because we will be moving on from the emails in a minute. I'm gonna pick this. I can't speak. I'm sorry. What was the most difficult skill you learned, and why do you feel it was the most difficult?
Okay, so I think the most difficult skill I learned was Miller plus plus, so 5 twists in a double layout. And I always liked that skill, and I liked twisting, and I'd gone up to 6 twists as well, but I think I managed that once successfully and decided that was enough. But the challenge with Miller plus plus and Miller plus as well is that there's next to no time to spot the trampoline sort of throughout the skill, which is that's what I relied on to maintain my aerial awareness. I was all about spotting, and I could do it in a number of different ways and a number of different skills. But for Miller plus, you know, I broke it down as full cruise Randy. So there's a moment to spot after the cruise, but really you're going to twist into the bed if you wait that long to Randy. So the ultimate skill basically became double full in, double full out. You get a tiny peek over your shoulder as you start the initial twist on takeoff, but then you see absolutely nothing until the end, until you break the twist and prepare for landing. And the problem with that too, twisting so much, it speeds up the rotation of your flip. So you had to have a very precise amount of lift on the skill, precise amount of flip, and you had to twist incredibly fast, which meant you had to flip a little bit slower. So it was just a very challenging combination of sort of different elements of trampoline. And I could tell if I had it right or wrong right on takeoff. Like it was no question whatever. I could, you know, if I left the bed and I felt something weird, it would turn into a Miller, or turn into something a little bit less, break the twist, do a double full in, back layout out or something, because I knew I didn't want to be on my heels or I didn't want to be on my face. So if I broke the twist, I could change my position, adjust for the amount of rotation I have, and come down safely on my feet. But I was able to do those skills successfully for a number of years. But when I started, I guess near the end of my career, that was one of the first ones I took out of the routine, because the ability to generate that sort of perfect combination of lift, flip, and twist started to go before anything else.
So I have one more for my list, and then I'm going to start with the chat ones, because this is one of mine, which is obviously you do a fair amount of kind of social media interaction and stuff. And one of the things that you do that I think everyone enjoys is that you do invite people to play add-on with you, and everyone loves playing add-on. So I was wondering, what's the most amusing or most tricky thing someone has played on you in add-on that's made you really go, okay, I need to get you now?
Let me think. It was always playing add-on with Sam Sindel at Skyriders. Like she was a master at that game as well, and that's one of the things I will miss most. But she would always do these really annoying things. It's actually not even that complicated of skills, but if we'd start with a 1 3/4 front, she'd manage to do a double pullover backwards. And I just sucked at that. Like I wasn't good at holding my feet over my head or, traveling forwards on the 1 3s so that you'd hit a rebound and go backwards on the, double porpoise backwards. The technique is just awkward. The skills themselves, not that difficult to do. A lot of people can do 1 3s. A lot of people can do a backdrop into a double pullover, but to combine those two, just very irritating. So I would do everything. That's why I chose to go to my stomach a lot and add on, because Sam couldn't pull that kind of crap on me from her stomach.
Okay. So going from body landing skills, one of the first questions is to say, you're incredible with body to body skills. Do you find them more comfortable than feet to feet skills?
During the end of my career, I did. But that was mostly due to injury. As some people may know here, I tore my ACL twice, sort of from 2014, retoured in 2015, competed without an ACL through to the 2016 Olympics, got surgery afterwards. So I definitely got very comfortable with back and stomach skills or body to body skills during those recovery periods, because when I wasn't strong enough or stable enough to jump on my feet, I'd spend all day on Supertramp doing porpoises and Codys in various different ways. And I could do, I could mimic things like Brannies, Rudies, Rudy outs, half fulls, double backs, half full fulls, like basically almost anything. I could start doing those sort of progressional skills or fundamental basics for starting to generate those, bigger doubles, but I could do them off my back and my stomach. And I got very comfortable doing that. And I just found that off back and stomach, as I'm sure everyone finds, you're more stable that way, right? When you're landing on 2 feet, you can weight bear unevenly. It's a smaller surface, so it can be a little bit harder to control. So I started to find a much bigger comfort zone, especially if I was, traveling to the side or back or, going in some unideal direction. A really comfortable place for me would be just to bail to back or stomach, because it's a nice big flat surface. I'd get a pretty controlled out bounce out of it, and the comfort zone developed there. And of course, I'd be in no risk of re-injuring a knee or an ankle or something like that if I landed on my back or stomach.
Yeah. Okay, so next question is, what makes you want to break boundaries with the difficulty of your routines, and how do you create them? Bearing in mind that you do already have 2 world records in this, so you do know what you're talking about.
That was always just like a passion of mine right from the beginning. I remember I started at a club called Airborne Trampoline, but I was only there for about 2 years because the ceiling wasn't very high. And then, so when I could hang off the rafters, I moved to Skyriders, and I was about 12 years old when I did that. But I remember one of the first days walking into Skyriders and seeing Matt and Karen jumping and training, because that's what our coach Dave would do, who sort of mixed the new kids with the senior athletes so that they'd have like a visual inspiration. And I saw these 2, Matt and Karen, jumping, and I was just so amazed at the skills they were doing, the height they were able to get. And from that moment, I was like, that's what I want to do. That guy, his name is Matt. He's the one I want to beat. Okay, good. Like, just had it all in my head right then and there. And then Dave really thrived on that kind of attitude from athletes as well. Like, if you had a goal, or if you wanted to learn and you were motivated yourself, then he got really excited. And then that excitement kind of fed off of each other. So I wanted to learn all these skills. I wanted to talk to Matt, even though I was super shy and didn't really talk at all to him. I wanted to know how he was doing these things. So I'd watch him. I'd watch videos Dave gave me. I'd learn all about these, different skills, because, when I was 12, I knew what a fliffus and a double back was. I didn't know what a Rudy out was, or a Miller, or a Triffus. So I got all these skills in my head. And since we had a Supertramp at Skyriders, I could start doing all of these big skills a lot sooner than most 12-year-olds or 14-year-olds, because I could jump higher on a Supertramp than anybody else could on a regular tramp. So there was just this constant excitement of, I want to learn the next trick. I want to catch up to Matt. One thing I left out, we always had this, like, a group of boys in the gym as well, who were all 12, 13, 14. Like, I basically grew up with them for 4 years, and we were a really competitive group as well. So if one kid, learned a full, the other 3 would be like, hey, screw you. I want to learn a full. And actually, I'm going to learn a Miller so I can do it better than you. And then we'd all kind of chase each other that way. One kid would learn a skill, the other 3 would catch up as fast as they could. So we had this really competitive environment, but it was like we were all geared to thrive in that. So everyone just learned quickly, pushed quickly. Like if you were scared of something, you figured out how to get over it, or you had the support of your team to get over it. And I basically just carried that attitude all the way through into my like senior national years. And, you know, Matt's 18-0 routine, which was sort of at the top of the DD wall at Skyriders. I hope people are familiar with that. I don't know if they are. I can answer questions about that later, but that was always just like the mark of, you know, I need to get to an 18 plus DD. And I was kind of thinking about that since I was 12 years old.
And then you did it.
And then it happened one day. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So next one is, so your experience with this is possibly different to normal given the effect of COVID on the participation in sport during the last year. But how are you finding the changes that have come with your retirement?
They are challenging, that's for sure. It's been very gradual because I think after the 2016 Olympics, I kind of made a bit of a mental decision to just train a little bit less or not put, you know, 100% of myself into this, because I knew, you know, after 2016, I was 29, turning 30. I knew I would have to move on from sport at some point, but I wasn't quite ready to be done with that. So I'd started thinking about life after sport at that point, but not really making big concrete decisions towards life after sport. But now with COVID, there's, you know, very minimal ability to train. I have decided to retire. You know, now there's no more funding coming in. There's no more grants or sponsorship. So, you know, I need to consider how am I going to make money after, you know, I can't just have no income for a couple of years. So it's been interesting. There's been a little more pressure around that now, but I've been exploring a lot of different things, which I'm starting to enjoy. Such as I have a social media position at a high performance center. I'm doing a Pilates instructor training, which is a big part of our conditioning program. I've done some stunts in film. So all of these things are sort of little pathways that I'm starting down as I begin my transition out of sport. And I don't know which one will take off. I hope at least one of them will, or maybe even a couple, but yeah, it's a little nerve wracking right now. It's a little scary because I don't have sort of that one thing that made me special, even though I am trying to, you know, stay connected to the community via coaching and judging and stuff like that. But it's definitely something any athlete, regardless of their level, needs to prepare for, is that idea of retirement and what comes after sport.
Okay. So next one is taking a little bit of a step into like your training process. So when you were kind of, you know, prepping, competing and everything, what kind of mental prep did you use, and what did you find was effective while you were competing? Like the tool that you could go to keep you on the ball?
Yeah, so my mental game was something that I think I always lacked a little bit of, because I had developed my own strategies sort of in competition and they were my most successful ones as well, where I would visualize my routines while I was on the competition floor. So I do one of two things, where I'd either just close my eyes and stand very still and think about the routine and sort of either view it from the outside in as if I was watching myself, or I'd view it from my own personal perspective. Like if I'm doing a triff pike, I'm staring at my knees right now, and sort of think about the sensations that I feel as I go through all of those skills from skill 1 to skill 10 to do a good routine. And the other way would be I'd sort of stand in one spot, but if I was doing a triff pike, I'd lift one leg into a pike position, hold that pike position, give a little tug with my arm so that it feels, once again, relating to the sensation of doing a triff pike, reminding my mind and my body about what we're about to do in the next turn. But the other thing, I always found that I tried to ignore my nerves, which I don't think was really a great choice. It's better to probably try and use those nerves to your advantage or confront them anyway. One way I did try to do that, because I always found the most nerve-wracking part was when you sort of step on the trampoline and turn to face the judges. I didn't like that part. I'd get like an extra little like jump in my stomach, as I'm sure many people do. So for many years, I would sort of pace the floor, you know, in between your one touch and your compulsory routine. I'd stare all around the gym, but I'd make particular note to stare like at each one of the judges and just sort of not really make eye contact, but like recognize who they are, whether I knew them by name or by face, just to know Like, these are the people you're going to see last before you start your routine. So get comfortable with it. Try and, take the edge off that little jump in your stomach that's going to happen, and go from there. But yeah.
Thank you. Okay, what preconceptions do you find people have about trampolining that are just completely wrong? Completely no idea what it is trampolining.
One, that it's dangerous. I don't think trampoline needs to be dangerous. I think a lot of people see it as a backyard sport, and if you jump on a backyard trampoline, then you're going to get hurt in some way. But I found, I try and tell people you have to treat trampoline like a swimming pool. You can't just give a kid a pool or a trampoline and then let them go play in it or on it without supervision, right? And no parent would do that with a pool. They wouldn't say, hey, 5-year-old, go jump in the pool. I'll be in the kitchen making dinner, and you'll just do whatever you want for the next 30 minutes. That's not going to happen because people know kids drown in pools. Whereas I don't think a lot of people have really realized that it's super easy for a kid to go upside down on a trampoline, break an arm, break a leg, break a neck, something really terrible happens, but they still let it happen, where they say, go jump on the trampoline, take 5 of your friends and all jump together, and they put them in these dangerous situations, and they're unsupervised, and that's how bad things happen. Whereas, trampoline in a supervised environment with a coach can be a very meticulous process, right? There, you don't get to move on to the big tricks until you've mastered the basics. There's all these little tiny steps that take you from a seat drop up into a backflip or a Rudy or a Triffus or whatever, and it takes years to do that. Sure, there's a bit of danger because you're flipping over your head and there's potential for things to go wrong, but coaches have so many strategies to limit that kind of danger. So I think that's probably the biggest one, is that people think trampoline's dangerous, but you just have to be smart about it.
Okay. So next question is a bit about your injury. So did you find it particularly difficult to return to training mentally or physically after tearing your ACL? And as a result of the whole experience, do you have any tips for someone else who might be going through it?
Yeah, for sure. So the first ACL tear, I didn't find it too mentally difficult to come back. I think just because I was inexperienced about it, and I'd only really broken bones before that. And the nice thing about breaking bones is that bones heal, in a 6 or 8 week period, and then they're strong again and they're good. And it's kind of like you have a start and finish date, and you can go back to doing whatever you're doing. Ligaments are completely different. There's no real hard date that says your ligament is now healed. And it's all it's like experimentation. So you can get back on a trampoline after your ligament has healed, but if your joint swells and things get pissed off, then it's clearly not as strong as it needs to be, and you need to take more time to rest. So on my first ACL tear, I didn't really understand that part. I got back on a trampoline way too soon. I only took 5 months off to recover post-surgery because we were rushing back to try and get back to a Pan Am Games happening in Toronto. So I was back on tramp by 5 months. I had lots of swelling and pain in my knee joint for 2 more months after that. So I could really only do backflips and brannies until month 7 post-surgery. And then at that point, things picked up. My knee got used to the pressure and the forces. My muscles developed. I could support myself a little bit more. But in September of that year, so 11 months post-surgery, it retore while I was jumping on the trampoline. It wasn't a fall, it wasn't anything. I was just side traveling a little bit and needed a little extra force through my leg to push myself back to center. And I just felt this weird wobble, which it didn't even stop the routine. I finished the routine. I think I was on trick 7, made it through to trick 10, but I felt there's this weird wobbling sensation, which ended up re-tearing the ACL, which I still didn't recognize at the time because an ACL has no nerve ending. So if you only tear an ACL, it actually doesn't hurt. You just get swelling in the joint, and then your hamstring will probably be super pissed off the next day because when the ACL goes, the hamstring jumps in to hold that femur and tib fib sort of together so that your leg doesn't explode. So once I had that experience, that's when I lost a lot of trust in my sort of right side leg, especially my knee joint, coming back from that injury. Especially because I had to train without the ACL for the next 10 months, and we basically had to figure out how to tape it back together with tape and with braces to keep it stable without an ACL. And that was really, really challenging and really unpredictable. It took us about 6 months of experimenting with different types of tapes or braces just to keep the knee stable. So I'd get a week or two of half decent training with a certain strategy, and then there'd be some crazy wobble again. And have to take a week off because my hamstring was on fire and really pissed off. And then we'd recover from that, get another couple weeks in, something similar would happen until we figured out what the ideal strategy was. So I think just because it kept failing on me over and over without an ACL, even after I'd had the reconstructive surgery again, after the 2016 Olympics, I knew I never wanted to tear an ACL again. So I became very cautious. And I was always looking for swelling to sort of check up on the knee, even if nothing bad had happened. That was just like a regular practice after training. And that got in my head. I did it so much, my physio ended up telling me, like, you got to stop doing that because you're focusing too much on the knee. Like you just inherently don't believe it's going to be okay while you do this, that played a big role in why I didn't, put 100% effort into a return to sport after the 2016 Olympics, because in my mind, if I trained at, a 70% level 4 times a week, that was in the safe zone. If I did more than that, 80% of 5 or 6 or 7 times or 100%, then that now put my knee in danger for a third ACL tear. And that was not an option for me. So at that point, and even to this day, I saw a physio yesterday because now I have SI joint pain, which is like a joint in your hip. And he was basically saying, your mechanics look great, but I can see that mentally you don't like to, do single leg lunges on that right side knee. Like there's still something mentally holding you back. And it stems from, I was so cautious jumping on my, with that leg post injury. And now that's sort of, he's, written me out a conditioning program that is all single leg lunges to sort of retrain the brain that, yes, you have a strong leg, you have a stable ACL, you have a stable knee joint, you can go through normal ranges of motion as you walk, as you lunge, as you squat. You don't need to worry about that anymore. But my brain, or a little piece of it anyway, still thinks there's something to worry about.
So you'd recommend like patience and not getting too into your own head about the recovery process, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I didn't answer that second part. So I would say for anyone who particularly tears an ACL, just take the year. It's okay to take the year. It's so much like a year off is what I mean by that. You want to fully recover and heal 100% before you get back on a trampoline. There's no need to sort of risk that second tear because they're big recoveries and they take lots of time out of your trampoline career. And we don't all have that much time, right? If you don't want to waste that kind of stuff. So if you do have the unfortunate luck to get injured, yeah, focus on your recovery in the beginning phases, do it right the first time, strengthen like crazy, get all the swelling out, like just follow what the physio says. And then listen to your coach and your strength and conditioning coaches when you're back on equipment so that you know what signs to look for. It is okay to do little self checks for like swelling and anything like that in the beginning, but yeah, you don't want to fixate on it too much or else you will create that sort of mental crutch that you're always sort of worried about.
Okay. So we're going to go back to competitions a little bit. So obviously people have their own ways when they're on the competition floor of like preparing things that make them feel confident and, ready, things that can completely throw them off. One of the things that people come on different sides of is watching the routines of the other people in their category. Would you say you're the person who likes to watch everyone, it doesn't really get to you, or do you like just completely avoid seeing your competitors and focus on yourself?
Right. Yeah, that was one of the things I feel like I was bad at because I never really made a firm, concrete decision on during my career. I think what I should have done is not watch the other athletes, because I would watch them, I'd see something really cool or someone do something really impressive, and that would have a negative effect on me. I'd start thinking, oh crap, how am I going to do better than that? And that's not helpful in a competition environment. But I just genuinely wanted to watch the competition so badly. Like I'd miss a few routines, but I'd reward myself. Like when Ushakov got on the trampoline, I'd say, okay, but I can go watch Ushakov because he's just so awesome, right? But then he'd do something awesome and I'd think, oh crap, like I can't beat that. And it might have a negative effect on my performance now. So it wouldn't always be the best strategy, but it was just something I found hard to resist, basically, because I just wanted to see what was going on.
With people doing like the most impressive stuff in the world, like you can't punish yourself by not watching everything. Like.
Yeah,
Totally.
even though I knew I'd get the video like content afterwards because we had someone on our team specifically for that, but it doesn't compare to watching it live in person from a particular angle, right? You can circle the floor a little bit of the stands, and I don't know. It's just I look forward to the day I can be on like a big judges panel or something and just watch a competition from start to finish and judge routines or do DD or something like that.
Well, the next question is actually about difficulty is mentioned in it and time of flight. So you're well known for pushing the boundaries of difficulty. With time of flight weighted so heavily in the code of points now, do you think it has or will stop the progression of difficulty because skills aren't as worth it in a final total score?
Yeah, that is true. Well, I think they're kind of right on that one. I think people will stall out a little bit on difficulty. Although they have pushed it pretty far right now. Like we've got people like, Andre Uden, who's doing like 18.4 and stuff like that. And I think Tushao has done things like that as well. So like that's only 4/10 off the record, which is huge. And they're doing it well. Like I don't really understand why those athletes haven't gone beyond 18.8 yet, because I feel like they absolutely could. But they make a good point saying like height is so, it's basically equivalent to DD now, right? Especially if you're doing, 18 on time flight and you can do an 18 degree of difficulty, like they're pretty evenly weighted. And I guess most athletes aren't doing that 18, but might be able to get up into the 16, 17 time flight. So it's actually weighted more than difficulty. So I haven't given it a ton of thought until this question was brought up, but yeah, I think it probably makes more sense to focus on your time of flight and do easier skills, because with easier skills, you'll have a higher execution, which is also weighted more heavily than DD most often right now. So I think ideally the ultimate strategy is, more height, easier skills, better execution, which also most likely leads to better HD as well. That's the way to maximize your score. So maybe that's why people haven't been pushing the DD in a way that I believe they could.
Okay, that was a very good answer for something you hadn't considered. We're going to move on slightly sideways to trampoline parks, which can sometimes be at a little bit of a contentious point. But the question that's been put here is, what is your view on the role of the trampoline parks and the creation of future high-level performers? Or do you think they pull people away from a club trampolining structure? So basically, do you think they're contributing, or do you think maybe they're interfering?
Right. Yeah, I don't think they're contributing at all. I've never known anyone who's come from like a trampoline park and found their way into a trampoline gym and become like a national or like even like a proper trampoline athlete. So I don't think they're contributing anyway to like the field there. Like maybe they, attract more numbers and more people are exposed to trampoline in that way. But I think they get stuck in that headspace of, this is a backyard trampoline and it's probably dangerous, because how many people are getting injured in trampoline parks because they have 100 trampolines of different shapes and sizes lined up against each other, and people are colliding with each other, rolling ankles, or not trained how to use the equipment properly. So I think it just adds to that stigma that trampoline is a dangerous thing and shouldn't be done.
Do you think with like added supervision they could maybe find a better place then, or is it something that you think just the design of it's not necessarily the best?
Yeah, I don't think the design is great, because you could add supervision, but like ideally you have one coach for one trampoline, or one coach for a small group of athletes. But I've been there once before. I went with some stunt friends a little bit earlier this year, and I think I saw like 3 of the like supervisors or coaches sort of mulling around, not really doing anything, and there must have been 50 people sort of spread out amongst this big place. So like what they're doing safety wise or to control that environment doesn't seem like an effective strategy to me right now. And it just seems like the ideal place to go break an ankle.
I'm just going to carry on from that before I go on to the next question. So you went to a trampoline park with like some stunt friends and stuff. How many of the staff did you give a heart attack to before you left? Or did you try and be nice and keep it down?
No, we like did our stuff, because a lot of them had trampoline or gymnastics backgrounds as well. I think some of them had kind of warned one of the managers that like, hey, we're professionals, we know what we're doing, we'll be in this corner. And they kind of like, they were okay with that. I think they were happy that we went and notified them. And yeah, it was fine. We got told to do, or not to do a couple things. Like they didn't want us hanging on the roof or, doing triples or anything like that. But you know, our presence was like easily identifiable because we were the ones jumping to the roof where everyone's like pinging, everyone else is pinging around 5 feet off the ground. No.
Okay, so we're going to move slightly sideways back into the Olympic stuff for a second. So in the lead up to the Olympics you did compete in, what would your typical training day kind of look like? How was it weighted and what did you include?
Yeah, for sure. So those like peak training days or peak training months anyway, at its heaviest, we were on a trampoline 9 times a week. So we typically do 6 days of the week. And then Monday, Wednesday, and Friday would all be double practices. And then was it Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday would be single practices, and they'd each be about 2 hours each. So that's maybe 18 hours on a trampoline. But also I remember Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, we would do weight training in between those 2 trampoline practices. So it'd be like a really heavy day and then a light day, heavy day, light day. And then the weekend is, you know, Saturday off, Sunday's a light day. So we get a bit of recovery time there. But those are really challenging times just because that was a lot of exercise and activity to get used to, especially when we started phasing in. Because we were doing heavy lifting at that time as well. That was sort of our strategy is we train early or like late morning, early afternoon. We'd go straight to weight training and we'd focus on like a lot of quarter squats or jump squats or things like that. And we'd lift 400 or 500 pounds or something like that. And then we'd go home and nap because we had to jump at 8 p.m. that night or something like that. And the focus in the morning was usually, you know, drills, not single skills, but like shorter chunks of routines, parts, and tricks, and then maybe a couple routines here or there. And then we'd weight train, and then the evening would be like, now we're doing routines. So it was a lot. But we kind of got used to it over a couple months, and like that was our schedule pre-2012. So that's why Rosie succeeded and did so well, because she was on this crazy training and regime as well. And so was Karen and myself. It was basically just 3 of us that would travel around and like see each other all day long. But we were a great team. We loved that. We were exhausted together, so it worked out.
So you've talked already a little bit about how, unfortunately, being a high-class trampoline athlete is not necessarily going to make you rich. But do you have any advice for adult athletes who train and compete alongside a full-time job? So how to maximize what they're getting from, you know, the limited time they have trying to pay the bills and everything?
Yeah, that's a super challenging question. I want to say it's probably not one that I ever really mastered. Like I was in school a lot as I trained, but it was always part-time school. And I'm not sure what your guys' training program looks like, but us here in Canada, or at Skyriders anyway, we always trained from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. at night. It was always a night training. So like we could work, you know, a full 8-hour job or go to school all day, but then you'd be exhausted for practice. I don't know if I have a good answer for this one, except, you know, you have to obviously eat healthy, take naps when you can, and you kind of have to schedule your day around your practice if you want to have like a good practice. But of course, that's not always an option if, you know, you have set work hours or something like that. Yeah, I don't think I have a good answer for that one, because that's, you know, I was lucky. I didn't have to deal with, you know, having a full-time job or even a part-time job really as I trained. I was able to put all my effort into sport, but that's a huge luxury that I was very, very lucky to have. And that's, you know, yeah, I don't know.
So do your best is basically the answer.
Really hard. And then, but also like, I think these people have to understand, like they should never feel bad about their skill level or, you know, what other people are doing versus what they're doing, because, you know, there are people like myself or like the Chinese athletes or the Russian athletes who sport is life for them. They don't have to worry about anything else. Whereas if you have to worry about school or work or a family at home or something, and you just can't do as much as all the other athletes, like you're doing so much more than them really, because you have to split your brain and split your time between all these different things. Whereas we had a singular focus. It makes, you know, climbing the ranks and performing at a high level so much easier when you have a singular focus. But to have those multiple focuses, like it's crazy that people are able to organize their lives around that and still find success in sport. Like that's very, very impressive to me.
It's very nice to hear. So I have another slightly complicated one for you. Do you think gymnasts not pushing their difficulty score as much as they could will reduce the attractiveness of the sport to the general public and jeopardize its place in the Olympics?
I don't, because I think the general public doesn't really understand what they're seeing on a trampoline. So whether you do a triffus or a quadriffus or a Rudy out or a Randy out, someone who's seeing trampoline for the first time or has only seen it a handful of times has no idea what's going on. They're just super excited to see flippy, twisty tricks, right? Whether it's a 15-0 or a 17-0, those people are going to have no idea. And in fact, when I did trampoline shows, like for like fairs or corporate events or stuff like that, the thing that got the biggest reaction would be, do a big complicated skill followed by a big back layout. Another big complicated skill, big back layout, because the crowd who'd never really seen trampoline before, they understood contrast, right? So if you do something big and scary and messy followed by something big and high and slow, they can see the difference, right? And they like big, high and slow, like big, crazy backflips still look cool to people who don't see trampoline all the time. But so do, Rudy outs and triffuses, but they can see the difference between one another. So, I think a crowd pleasing routine would be triffus back layout, Rudy out back layout, sort of along that pattern. That's not a lot of DD, but for people who haven't seen trampoline, that's almost more exciting for them.
You mentioned there like trampoline shows. Is there like a huge difference between then, like obviously you talked about the construction of routine, but huge differences in how you approach trampolining for entertainment and how you would do your trampolining purely for the sake of training a competition routine?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't done a show in a while, but shows were like I did in my teens and 20s, but they were just so much fun and there's no pressure because like I mentioned before, people don't know or understand what they're seeing. So you can break form, you can fall off, you can do something messy or sub, like no one has any idea. They're just seeing crazy trampoline tricks. And even going 10 feet high is super high for people who aren't typically, viewing trampoline. So shows were just fun. We'd come up with we'd have inside jokes as we'd swap turns out. There'd be sort of a schedule of turns that each athlete would be doing. I don't know, there were games we could play with the crowd. Like it was nothing like a competition, but it was also, I think, great training for competition as well, because you had to be comfortable in front of a crowd, whether you're performing as a showman or you're competing as an athlete. You needed to know that the crowd isn't like a scary thing, right? So that was one thing that Dave, sort of my coach, got us into when we were younger, because he would, have a few of these once or twice a year, or he knew people running trampoline shows and they would contact him for athletes and he'd say, yeah, Jay's good, like get him out, because he knew, trampoline show might eat into training time, but that's like the best training environment for getting used to a crowd and competition. And he credits, for people who know Matt Turgeon, he was the Canadian Olympic athlete in Sydney who won a bronze medal. Matt I don't think he'd ever won a World Cup medal before going to the Olympics. Not in synchro, nothing. And I think his best ranking at World Championships was like 11th or something. It's still good, but like far from the podium still. But Dave credits Matt's success at the Olympics because Matt had done shows at basketball games, at fairs, at corporate, like he performed in front of thousands and thousands of people before. And he remembers seeing, Matt walk out into this, stadium in Sydney and looking at the tens of thousands of people there and like his grin getting bigger and bigger. Whereas he'd look at the other athletes from other countries who'd never really done this and he'd see them like shrinking because, how many times do we get a chance to compete in front of 10 or 20,000 people? Never. So Matt had already done that a bunch of times in a different context, was super pumped about it. The rest of the field shied away from it. And Matt got all the way up onto the podium just purely because he had the attitude for it.
Yeah, it's good to see the play is still leading to good things. You don't want to discourage people away from the fun that they started for.
Yeah, exactly. It's good to be a showman sometimes.
Okay, I'm gonna head back to one of the questions on the side here. So how do you keep motivated when you're having trouble with getting a new skill, or you have a block, maybe you're regressing on skills you already had? How do you keep yourself going?
Right. So a big part of that was the environment at Skyriders. Like I mentioned before, there was always like a competitive group of, when I was younger, it was a competitive group of boys, but when I was older, I was with Karen and Rosie and Matt and a couple other athletes who were high level. who are always encouraging, always supporting, and you wanted to perform well for them. You wanted to perform well for Dave as well, because he's such an accomplished coach, and he had a lot of really unique strategies for getting you over those mental hurdles. So that's kind of the part that would keep you motivated anyway. And for me, I lost a ton of skills around when I was 16. Like I lost Rudy outs, half fulls, full fulls, Rudies. I remember I spent about 6 months doing front fulls and falling to my ass on the trampoline because I couldn't wrap a Rudy anymore. Like it just took forever. But the way I started to get over that was I spent a ton of time, first of all, watching video of people doing it correctly. So I had a good mental image of what I needed to do and what the goal was. But then I also started thinking more and more and more about, when do I spot the trampoline throughout all these skills? And that's eventually what helped me start turning the corner, is I really started to understand, if I'm doing a Rudy, I need to take off and see the trampoline at about that stomach drop position right on takeoff. Now I know where I am. Now I need to twist, but I'm going to be twisting 1.5 times around. That's going to be too fast to see anything. So I need to know and accept that there's going to be a blind spot. And I need to know exactly what that feels like to make it through. So I can do a lot of, corkscrews. So like backdrop, 1.5 twist to backdrop, or just or cat twists, just ways to get used to that blind twisting sensation and start to identify exactly what 1.5 twist feels like. So when I went back to Rudy, see the trampoline, blind into the twist, but you know exactly what 1.5 twist feels like. And then when you're done, see the trampoline, figure out where you are in the air, put your feet down. And I got really, really good at that for every skill I could do. Like I remember there was a period of 2 weeks where I went from, I can't do a Rudy, to I can do a Rudy. I can do a Rudy out now. I haven't done full Rudies or Millers for a long, long time, but same principle applies. Full cruise, look at the trampoline, wrap 1.5 twists. As soon as I figured out, spot every step of the way, I went from no Rudies up to Miller Plus within a couple weeks time, because I got so comfortable with those progressions and with that spotting. And I've been doing all of that fundamental training and builders and progressions for years, but because of the mental blocks, I wasn't able to put it all together. But then something clicked and the spotting became comfortable, and it went from 0 to 60, and that basically solved all of my skill problems at that point. So like from 16 on, I was able to do a bunch of different skills, and I would still lose them from time to time, but I got so comfortable with the builders and progressions. If I spaced a trick, I'd jump off the trampoline, catch my breath, get on the next turn, and do the progressions on my own. I didn't need a mat anymore, but just focus on when and where I wanted to see the trampoline. And I could usually get the skill back within a single turn just by going, implementing that strategy.
Okay, so it sounds like with a lot of the answers you've given, your kind of mental prep and particularly the imaging to you has played a huge role in like keeping yourself going and learning and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the ability to like understand what you want to see in the air and to be able to see it in your mind's eye is really important. But then also recognizing what sensation accompanies those visual cues is also super important. So like, to me, I can close my eyes, I can feel what it's like to do a triffus. Like I recognize that sensation, I know what it is. And I can also, in my mind's eye, sort of see, like if I'm doing a triffus, I'm going to see my knees, and there's going to be a little bit of blur in my peripherals that kind of tell me I've gone 3 times around. I know what 3 times around feels like. So I let go of my legs, and there's the trampoline. Now I'm brannying. Like the whole skill is it's comfortable because I understand all those little bits and pieces that make it feel safe for me personally anyway.
Okay. So back to the side, are there any up and coming gymnasts whose career you're excited to keep an eye on, someone you can see exploding in the next few years?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited for, there's a young Canadian named Jeremy Cartier, which some people may be familiar with. I think he's only 19 or 20, but he's going to be like the next big Canadian guy. Super talented, super strong, trains out of Quebec. I've seen him do 17-1s that are, world class. Like he really should have been on the podium or at least in the finals at a couple of these World Cups this past year, World Championships. But the problem is he's young though. He doesn't have that competition experience of being at the big meets under all that pressure. So he's a little inconsistent right now, but I find that's a very common pattern a lot of young athletes go through, right? They kind of break onto the scene, they do something really cool, they realize they've got all this potential, but they still get nervous at a lot of meets and end up crashing. I think the same thing happened to Ivan I can't remember his last name, from Belarus, the little 17-year-old or 18-year-old who came second at the World Championships in 2019. Super impressive, but I think at a lot of the World Cups, he didn't have great results because he was failing to complete routines. But we can all see at that World Championships, he's got absurd potential. He's so, like, he looks so small and thin, but he's so freaking strong because he jumps almost as high as Gaudet does. So that's super exciting to see. It'll be really interesting to see, like, does he push that DD like boundary? Because, you know, he might be one of those rare people that has the ability to go high, do really big tricks, and not sacrifice form or control, right? And I think Jeremy's similar. I know he can jump super high. He's built differently than Ivan is. Like, he's a bit more like built like a fridge. Like, he's probably my height, but he's probably, you know, 160 or 70 pounds because he's like just strong as a bull. But that, you know, he uses the trampoline in a different way. And once he figures out how to be consistent in training, or sorry, in competition, like, he's going to have some spectacular results one of these days.
That's exciting, and they're both still quite young as well, so they have longevity to point.
Yeah.
Okay. So did Gymnastics Canada help you transition out of being a full-time athlete and back into real life so that you weren't so lost after your athletic career?
So it wasn't necessarily Gymnastics Canada, but the Canadian Olympic Committee has a program they call Game Plan, and Game Plan is an athlete transition program. So you can start accessing this while you're an athlete, during your transition, or as like a fully retired athlete. And they basically do, they offer opportunities like job shadowing. You can do like aptitude tests through them. You can sit down with counselors and talk about school programs. They've made partnerships with some of the universities here in Canada, so you can get scholarships through them and stuff like that to business schools. They just do a lot of different things. And I've engaged with Game Plan quite a bit, done some job shadowing stuff at LinkedIn at a tech company, which was really cool. Did some internships at a sports center, which is how I have my social media position now, where I kind of run my own program there with some different national teams, which is really fun. And that's been really, really helpful. I think the only reason I haven't been super successful yet at transitioning out of sport is because I don't have like the clearest of goals for what I want to do after trampoline. I know it has something to do with it, but you know, I can't live off being a trampoline coach and a judge. Maybe I could as a coach, but I don't want to be like a full-time coach. That just doesn't, I want other aspects in there. So purely because I don't have the clearest of goals yet is why, you know, I'm still sort of floundering around a little bit. But the Canadian Olympic Committee and their Game Plan program has helped a lot of different athletes sort of transition from sport into the next big thing.
Well, it's good to know that there is like something written in there. You don't have to figure it out on your own after so long of one.
Exactly. There's lots of support. You just have to figure out how you're going to take advantage of it as well.
Okay. So this is going a little bit back. This is crossing over with the discussion about removing the set routine and what we were talking about with trampolining for entertainment. But the question here is, it's very interesting. You mentioned that people enjoy the contrast more when they're watching trampoline and such. Would that make a decent argument for the set routine and removing the set routine, potentially making the sport less appealing to the average viewer who doesn't really know what they're looking at?
Sorry, my dog was barking. Could you repeat that? I missed a bit of that. I know it was a long one.
I'm going to say that you should show us your dog whilst he's there.
Yeah, sure. Here, maybe. This is Luna. She is a little chocolate labradoodle. She's usually cute, but sometimes she's annoying, right? Yeah, you have no idea what's going on. Clearly, we've heard something in the hall that was very upsetting, so now we need to be comforted, right? All right, there you go.
Oh, great. So I'll repeat the question from the start. So it's very interesting. You mentioned people enjoy the contrast more when we're looking at trampolining without knowing what they're seeing necessarily. Would that make a decent argument for the set routine? Is removing the set routine potentially making the sport less appealing to the average viewer?
You know, I don't think so, because I think the contrast needs to happen almost instantaneously, whereas the set routine, you've got all your nice, simple, basic skills sort of in one 10 skill routine. And then everybody, you know, sees the same thing over and over again from, you know, your first flight of compulsory routines. And then 20 minutes later, you get into the optionals, which is your contrast, right? I think that's too much of a break, or too much time for lay people who don't see trampoline all that often to really understand or see the difference or recognize the difference that much. I think what they're trying to do with the 2 attempts at an optional is, if you're showing people who don't often see trampoline, like they'll come in, they'll see the big tricks, it'll be short and fast and sweet. And they can appreciate that a little bit at least. And then it almost becomes like, like a vaulting final where most people who watch vault maybe don't really understand what they're seeing, but they understand like, ooh, they've got 2 chances to do their routine. And if they don't do it, then it's over. Like that's a little bit more understandable for people outside trampoline. But yeah, on the contrast thing, I think it's got to be back to back opposed to separated by time and different routines.
Okay. So we're getting near the end, but there's 2 more questions in the chat and I have one more on my own list.
Yep.
If anyone has one that they have been sitting on out of shyness, this is your last chance. Throw it in the chat, and either we'll try and get through as many as possible, or if it's something we really haven't covered at all and you really want to ask about it, now is the time. So is there a skill on your bucket list that you've never landed, either trampoline or super tramp?
Let's see. It's probably like a quint, like 5 quintuffus. I don't know if there's a proper name for it. I've done them on super tramp into a mat, but they've never been high enough to do like get even a bit of a kick out. I think the only one I actually put to my feet was like a big sort of side summy out where you never really let go of your knees. So like you can barely kind of count it, but also it was such a sketchy looking trick as well that, it doesn't really count as doing it. Actually, another one that comes to mind was I was trying to do half full. So quadruple somersault, what's that, 3.5 twists. But I remember I was trying it when I was younger and probably not quite as strong and not quite as smart either. But I remember I was doing the builders, so like Branny, full cruise duck under, but I was just like skimming my scalp every time I ducked under. Like it was a dangerous thing for me to be doing. And thankfully I was smart enough to recognize it after a couple attempts and never came back to it. But that would be a cool one to have done. I don't know if there's many people doing triple twisting quads out there yet.
I couldn't name one, I'll be honest.
I think a super tramp is very necessary for that type of skill.
But you're very lucky. A lot of places would kill to have one.
Yeah, very lucky. Super tramp has been like probably the most useful learning tool at Skyriders, just because you're able to bounce higher, you feel safer because there's more space, and you can just start learning bigger tricks sooner. Okay, so I'm going to power through a couple more. I understand that your lower gradings are quite informal and relaxed. Did the transition to national and international level competitions feel like a huge step to you, or do you feel like the relaxed structure was beneficial to make that step? So the relaxed structure of, what do you mean?
Your lower competitive grades. So when you first start out, if you've got a routine with maybe a single tuck front on the end, and you're trying out the competition experience, and a bit more informal than we have here. Did you find it was helpful to getting to the bigger competitions, or no?
Yeah, it was definitely helpful, but I think every competition like kind of felt the same to me, whether it was like my first provincial meet or my first Olympics. Like it was still a nerve-wracking experience that I cared deeply about. And because I cared so deeply about my performance, even if it was a more informal environment, I always felt nervous and I always felt a little bit scared. And I always, thought, what if I just ran out of the room right now and didn't come back? I wouldn't have to deal with this pressure or this fear of doing my routine. But I think that's like a huge character building experience that, like people aren't running out of the room to avoid doing the routine. Everyone in that competition ends up facing their fear and facing the pressure, regardless of how much pressure they feel. There's always some there. And I think just being able to, stand with that weight on your shoulders and get up and do your routine, whether you fail or succeed, it doesn't matter. It just matters that you faced it and you tried. And that's a huge thing. That's like a huge character development thing. And that's really, really important. And that happened, like I said, regardless of the level of competition, you still have to face it. And you still have to get your answer of whether you can handle the pressure or whether you can't. And if you can't handle it and you crash, well, that's not like that doesn't mean you can't forever. That just means you couldn't today, and you'll continue to work on it and build towards something bigger and better.
Two left. Well, three left. One is, when were you going to come to Ireland? Now, obviously, this is an Irish event, so people are always up for having athletes of your caliber over. We can learn from watching you, from chatting to you, show you what's going on in another country and stuff. Would it ever be anything you'd be interested in?
Yeah, it absolutely would. I would love to come over. I've never been to Ireland before, but it's kind of one of those places that I've always wanted to see. It's unfortunate we never had any like international meets over there. But I would definitely love to come. Obviously, with COVID, that's not really an option right now. But sort of one of my goals post trampoline athlete career is that I'm kind of working on right now is like a website, like a skill-based website that would demonstrate sort of ideal skills, how the progressions to learn them, the form from a judge's perspective, so the ideal way to perform them, and the way to spot the skills sort of from my own perspective, and make sort of instructional videos based off of that with a list of skills. And that's sort of step one, but I'd love to create training camps out of that. So that would kind of be like, here's my hub of knowledge that you can subscribe to and learn from, but also, you know, here's my expertise. You can also have me come in. We run a camp, we, you know, pick a few skills to work on, or we talk about team construction, or share experience of the, you know, experience of the Olympics, talk about competing, that kind of stuff. You know, I'd love to have, or to be able to offer something like that right now. But sort of first step is that sort of online hub. I'm sort of like imagining it's like a skill library right now, where you can sort of look up all these skills and gain information about it from my perspective, from Dave's perspective. But then to build training camps off of that, that could go, you know, across Canada, across the globe, anywhere. I haven't really, you know, it's all still in development, but, you know, I think that'd be super cool to do. And hopefully, you know, when COVID's over and when I put a little more time and effort into this, that can be, you know, a thing that happens over in Ireland.
That would be awesome. I'm sure you would have a very warm welcome if you made it this far. I'm going to throw one question in that was on my list. Obviously, anyone here who has actually spent any time training, learning anything that involves any kind of somersault knows, eventually you do an attempt and you fall over in such a silly, embarrassing way that you're not hurt. You wish you had it on video and you would shame yourself to everyone for the rest of the time. Do you have an example of a time that you just had to sit down and laugh at the ridiculous thing you just did?
Oh yeah, definitely. It was actually a challenging time to do that as well, because I think back to when like I couldn't do a Rudy and I had to do front fulls for like weeks and months on end, which is like, I was 15 or 16 at the time. I was doing trifuses, couldn't do the Rudy. And I would do granny and try and squeak like a quarter twist around, and, you know, barely make it, and I'd be falling on my ass. And at first I got super frustrated, because mostly because I was super embarrassed about doing this, because there's a room full of people around me, and I know they're kind of laughing every now and then when I do one that looks really goofy, or like have a straight arm or leg that flies out because I'm breaking my twist out of some sort of mental block or fear, and just falling on my ass. But eventually I just realized, like, you know, this is embarrassing, this is frustrating, but this is the process. You know, you just have to start laughing at yourself now, because if you keep getting pissed off about this, it's just going to build a bigger wall, and it's going to be harder and harder. So I did a bunch of goofy looking front fulls for weeks and weeks and weeks until I could figure out how to, you know, stay on my feet and eventually wrap a Rudy around. But I just remember, yeah, that piece about like, you've got to start laughing at yourself a little bit here, you know, was actually very helpful for relearning those skills.
Okay. The last one I'm going to take from here is, did you ever take your turn at trying other related sports like DMT or tumbling?
Yeah, I've done both. When I was 17, I tried double mini, only for about a month. I wasn't a very good runner, and I did one provincial competition where I ran and I jumped onto the mini. I jumped immediately onto the red zone, which at that time was like, you're eliminated from the competition. I did that 2 passes in a row, and I don't think I finished like either pass, because I probably jumped over the mini or like put my heels right on the bungee cord at the end or something and like whipped off, and then never did it again because I was so terrible at it. Which in retrospect, I'm sure I could have become better at it if I just practiced more, but at 17, I didn't have the patience to do it and wanted to do 10 skills on a trampoline. And then on the tumbling side of things, never competed it, but I always just liked it. So when I was younger, living in Toronto, I went to a gymnastics gym once a week with a bunch of friends. We'd play around on the tumble track and on the gymnastics floor. We'd tumble, we'd do parkour type of things or tricking. I could do like a line of whips down to the end. I could do a bunch of end skills. I could do double backs and halves and full fulls just from like a round off handspring into a big pit. I think I even tried pulling Millers, but mostly just twisted to my face into a mat or a foam pit. So never really successful. But those were like, I love doing that kind of stuff. It was so much fun. It was a nice break from trampoline. It was still acrobatic. So it was still reinforcing a lot of good things in my head and developing strength and skill and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I wouldn't have made a good tumbler. I got dizzy doing whips all the way down to the end. I was actually really surprised how dizzy I got doing 8 skills all backwards, which I guess makes sense. Like if you do 8 backflips on a trampoline, you get a little bit dizzy. But for some reason, it's just, well, for me, it's just so much easier on a trampoline. But I guess that makes sense because I spent 25 years on one, whereas I've spent, a couple of weekends on a tumble track or something.
That would show a little bit if you were trying it. Okay, so for everyone else, I'm going to say that we have sadly reached the end. If there's any other questions you want to put to Jason, I'm afraid you might have to approach him on social media or by email or something. However, thank you for coming today. Another reminder that this is aims to raise some money for the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. There's a link in the chat if anyone needed one to raise a little bit of money over the weekend for a good cause. But Jason, thank you very, very much for joining us. It's been great. With good luck in your retirement, and we hope one of those pathways that you've been looking at really turns out for you and you have a great time.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys having me. It's been a lot of fun today.
Come back anytime. Thanks.
All right. All right. Have a good day, everyone. Goodbye.